Hey everyone, this is Jonathan with the EthStaker crew here, and welcome to Community Call number 46. Excited to have a new team here with Commit Boost, and we're gonna have a really interesting presentation from them with some Q&A about their tool and how it can work for validators um, to improve their experience. I'm actually excited to learn about this as well. Um, there's a lot of good information on the GitHub, but I think that to hear it described will be really interesting, and hopefully we get some good curious questions going with them too. We have a number of folks here from the EthStaker team: Remy, Nixo, G Beast, Sam, Uda, Hanny. Thanks everyone for being here, and then we also have the Commit Boost team. So Drew and Kubi, and then also Ladislaw. Sorry, I didn't mean to leave you out either. So yeah, I think um, with that, I can hand it off to Drew and Kubi to discuss things. And I guess one of the first things I can let you maybe you guys can introduce yourselves first and just kind of let us know who you are and overall what you've built, and then we can get into some of these questions that we have planned here.
Awesome. Thanks, Jonathan. Thank you all for having us on. And yeah, we'll go through a bit of background and context around why Commit Boost was created, and a bit of what it is and what it provides and gives back to proposers, which we see missing today. But I'm Drew VOR. I got into Ethereum in 2016 and fell in love. Actually lost a bet to one of my roommates golfing, and then had to figure out how to buy ETH and things like that. So funny way in. But then actually in 2018, joined Goldman Sachs and was the second hire there to help build a crypto team, and did that for a few years. Then joined actually a hedge fund in the space called Brevenhauer Digital, and I was investing there mainly focused on Ethereum infrastructure. So really never left, but quit my job earlier this year and wanted to build something in Ethereum. A lot of ups and downs, different pathways, but ended with this thing called Commit Boost, which I'm super excited to talk about today. A couple years back, I had met Kubi, and Commit Boost is a public good open source project. We are grant funded, non-VC backed. There's no token, and had been discussing with them some of these concepts that Commit Boost could enable and what it was reducing risk-wise for Ethereum. And actually, their team stepped up to help develop it for free. It's a open source project, and now they're one of 70 plus teams that are helping on this. So it's really community effort, but I don't know if everyone's seen the meme, but the dog driving the car down the road while the guy's sleeping next to him. I'm kind of the dog, technically, blind, driving this car. So I got Kubi on to help me with the technical stuff. And maybe Kubi, you give a bit of intro on yourself and maybe what you do for your day job.
Yeah, I'll keep it brief. So hi everyone, I'm Kubi. I'm one of the co-founders at Gattaca, and we mainly focus on building out-of-protocol Ethereum infrastructure. So we build and operate the Titan block builder, but we also build an open source relay from scratch called Helix in Rust as well, and have been doing a few other open source efforts around like preconfirmations, for example, but also one of the core contributors to Commit Boost.
Yeah, so let me share my screen here. Unless there's anything else, Jonathan, you want us to hit on in the intros. Let me just see if I can get this
No, I think
going.
that covered the intros pretty well. I think I mean, I think I mentioned this before, like my mindset is coming at this from, you know, someone who's managing a node and, trying to think about what is this and how could it be something I consider, with or replacing other things that I use. So yeah, I'm excited to learn about this.
Awesome. Well, let's get into it. And yeah, this is the title. Very opinionated the way we title this, but returning autonomy back to all proposers. This is really important for us. And just Commit Boost isn't just about the way it's structured with regards to no token, no monetization, public good, but there are a lot of aspects that we thought about to ensure that all stakers are able to run this and participate in the potential future of what it means to be a staker in Ethereum. And so that has been a key thing for us. For some reason, there we go. And this has always been part of our DNA. The fun fact, our radio is our sort of logo that we came up with, and it's actually inspired by the Citizens Band radio, which was a kind of describes it here, but one-to-many bidirectional radio between individuals. And I tweeted this yesterday, but it really encompassed what we were trying to get to. And one of the key things is Commit Boost is built for the voice of solo stakers to be heard throughout Ethereum's block construction. And this has been a really hot topic recently around particularly blobs. And I'll talk a bit about this, but yeah, this is one of the key things we've always designed around. Okay, so let's talk a bit about, there's two reasons Commit Boost was created. One was to reduce risk.
Drew, really quickly, I just want to make sure, I think we're seeing slide 1 right now, and I don't know if that was the intended where you.
How's that?
Cool. Okay, yeah, we're seeing this expand.
This is the nice radio slide you guys missed.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
So you can, we'll make sure to provide the presentation too. People can take a look. But yeah, there's two reasons Commit Boost was created. Number one, it was about additional opportunities for validators. And number two, it's also about reducing risks that we saw developing. And we aren't alone in thinking about what the staker's role will evolve towards. There are some very smart people that have been building around Ethereum for a long time that have been thinking about this. Some of the good mental models of what the future of block construction may look like from a proposer's perspective, Vitalik talks about this is when a block is given to a proposer, the ideal state we end up in is that 80% of the block they propose is actually a quote unquote inclusion list, or I think about it as the proposer's perspective of how they want their block constructed. And then the additional 20% is these builders or other entities that are centralized sort of shining the block or packing around it. And he has a quote here where he talks about this, but probably the best mental model of how to think about what Commit Boost enables is captured by Barney Baby, where it's about the proposer giving a template that must be filled. And so you can express more views around how your block is constructed versus today, a lot of people run mevboost. And what ends up happening is when you run mevboost, you have a monopoly, and I'll get into this over your block, but you're kind of handing that monopoly over. And you're just saying, build me the most profitable block. And the builder can do whatever they want. They have no conditions. They have no constraints. There's no template you're giving them. You're just giving this blank slate and they fill it as long as it's the most profitable. And what we're trying to do is kind of change that dynamic to give autonomy back to the proposer to say, hey, builders, still build my block in the most profitable way, but here's a template that you must fill. And these template items we'll get into, but it could be things like inclusion lists. It can be things like preconfirmations. There's a whole host of ideas people are building around. But before we get to that, I just want to talk about a little bit of the evolution we see, re-emphasizing what we just discussed. This is validators today. They have a block. If you're lucky enough to be a proposer, then you have a monopoly over that block, which is awesome. And the challenge is, do you really have a monopoly? And this wasn't on the original slide where I used this, but for instance, you can't specify how many blobs are going to be in my block. And you're sort of at the whim of your voice being heard across Ethereum community to ensure like your bandwidth and everything can handle the amount of blobs. But in my view, potentially there's the way forward. But before we get to that, this is what builders look like today. They got the power. They're the ones, in my view, that actually have the monopoly over how a block is constructed. And even just in the market structure of today with blobs, there's builders who won't fill the blob space for latency reasons. There's a whole host of things builders do that proposers may not be aware of or align with or want to support, but they have really no choice if they run mevboost. Validators tomorrow, this is the template. So they still get to propose the block, but as they're proposing the block, when they propose it, they gave a template of different shapes that are in their block that must be filled alongside the rest of the block. And sort of in my view, this turns the proposer into Judge Judy. I don't know if this contextually goes across the globe, but sort of telling I'm the arbiter of how my block must be packed. And we'll go through some of those ideas, but one of the things around blobs that could happen is with Commit Boost, people create these modules, get up to what it is, but you as a validator or as a proposer could say, I only want 2 blobs in my block. Like the Ethereum max is 8, 16, 12, 20, whatever it is, but I can only handle 2. And so that's how my block must be constructed. It's just with 2s. And so it turns the power back to the proposer. Now, what does that mean for builders? Just getting into the analogy I used earlier about it makes the block 80% constructed towards an inclusion list. And inclusion list today has a very specific meaning, but I think about it when Vitalik used it more of like, what does the proposer want to be their block? Or how does the proposer want their block to be constructed? And then Mr. Clean or Mr. Shine is going around and just polishing the block. And 20% of it may be stuffed with highly valuable MEV transactions that are optimized by some builder running a bunch of optimizations. But this is kind of the builder of tomorrow. And so I guess the oracle of all our lives, Yoda, he asked the questions, proposers yield the power, you say. And I think the answer is trust them, we must. And that's sort of what Commit Boost is trying to enable. And this all sounds great, but one of the main reasons Commit Boost was actually created was if we buy into the thesis I just presented, it's a better path forward for Ethereum. Let's take that as a given. The output of this is, and actually Ladislaus was the one that had this quote, but there are likely to be more choices around the types of things proposers, quote unquote, sign off on versus just a payload today of that's what they see is just a payload, block header, fill my block as most probable as possible. And there were other teams that started to see this trend, that there was going to be this proliferation of other things proposers would sign off on. But how they were approaching it was they were trying to build, they were all forking a version of mevboost, they were creating their own sidecars, and even before preconfs became more popular, there was already 5 to 10 forks of mevboost. And what we saw happening was a potential where you would have sort of a sidecar per commitment or a sidecar per shape that people are wanting to get put into their block. And so we asked ourselves, is there a way to create a unified sidecar so that all proposers have to run just one sidecar, but can run these apps on top of the sidecar? And so instead of having to run multiple sidecars, it's kind of like you just run the app store and you pick the apps you want to opt into. And it's a much more seamless experience. I know there's a lot of home stakers on this call. Obviously, you all would prefer not to have to run a dozen sidecars, but even the sophisticated actors that were out there, a lot of the no-ops, none of them want to run 5 to 10 sidecars. And so that was one key thing. The other was core development complexity. There's a lot of still burden and things to pick up today just with mevboost, which is one sidecar. But if you had 5 to 10 of these things, it just increases what core developers have to think about. And then a lot of the way Commit Boost, we could have done this in a lot of different ways. And honestly, we're a 501c3. Nixo has a lot of experience with this, with getting EthStaker set up, but it's not an easy process. And there's a lot of easier ways to do this. Getting grant funding isn't easy, for instance. Having a VC just back you, having a token, all these things just make it easier. But we specifically designed this in a way not to have that, because we believe that the sidecar is a piece that should be a public good. It shouldn't be monetized. It shouldn't limit who can participate in these markets. It shouldn't limit who can build on top of these markets. It should be really an open playing field for all to become part of. And this is one of the key things that's different about Commit Boost versus some of the other teams that are building proposer commitment sidecars out there. This is a bit about Commit Boost. I touched on some of these things, but it is a nonprofit, fully grant backed. The product, which we'll get into, it's the best way to think about it, if you think about, Jonathan talked about this, but mevboost today is a sidecar proposers run. But it's not just a sidecar, it's a protocol. People kind of bucket those things together. And when I talk about the protocol side, what I mean is it also helps create a standard around how the proposer speaks to the relay, speaks to the builder, builder to the relay, and all these things happen. Commit Boost is just a sidecar. And what happens is the protocol component becomes the apps or the modules that are built on top of the sidecar. And so today, when you run Commit Boost plus PBS, what you're essentially getting is mevboost. But given the modularity and unification standards of how we're thinking about this, what you can also do is run these other apps like inclusion lists. So you can run PBS, which is just basically mevboost, plus inclusion list. And so you start to be able to make these shapes available within how your block is constructed. And what it means is you communicate as a proposer the conditions constraint around how your block is constructed. And that's what Commit Boost sort of does. It's just one of these pieces. So it's just a platform that standardizes how you communicate with the outside world. And then it gives a standard of how people develop these protocols on top of it. It's not a complex piece of software. The majority of the code is actually also focused on safety. So today you guys make one commitment when you run mevboost, that is, build my block builder in the most profitable way. Tomorrow, you're going to be making potentially more commitments. And so we built a lot of tools to ensure things like you don't miss a slot. Maybe not applicable to everyone on this call, but seamless integration with Prometheus and Grafana. So you have more insight into what's happening on your box. It's not just run mevboost. If I'm going to miss a slot, fall back to local building. But there's steps in between that validators can leverage to help mitigate the risk of missing a slot. And a lot of this has to do with just the increased complexity that comes as you introduce more commitments. Like I mentioned, neutrality. We believe commit boost, anyone can run it, or at some point in time, anyone can run it. It's not designed in a way that requires heavy sophistication. It's the same uplift that it takes to run commit, or it takes to run mevboost. But also it doesn't limit what people can build on top of it. We're not forcing proposers to opt into this. It's a self-inflicted decision, I guess, if you will. So you choose what modules to run, and then it doesn't limit who can build modules on top. So we're not saying only these people can build modules, only those people can build modules. It's open to anyone to build, and it's up to them to get these proposers to opt into. Security is a top of mind thing for us. We're doing audits and doing a lot around that. And then, like I mentioned, it's not just us. There's a community of 70 people. Some of the people that are on this call have been really core to how we've thought about this. Before we get into the sort of how we could use your help, if you want to volunteer to this, and then some of the technical details, I just wanted to highlight a bit of key things around the design decisions we made for Commit Boost had a lot to do with inclusion of all and just not limiting anything tied to a token or a VC. There's no monetization, it's a public good. And so, I'm not going to go through all these, but it's really important people understand that these are some of the key differentiations of other solutions that are out there. And we've made very, very specific designs and decisions around this that have made our life a lot harder, but we think is more beneficial for all stakers and Ethereum in the long term. This is we need your help. This is a volunteer effort. So if there's anything here that you'd want to help with, please do reach out. And then what I'll do is turn it over to Kubi to just give a high-level overview of what is it actually doing and the technical side of things.
Yeah, sounds good. So I'm going to keep it very high level, and as part of Q&A, just feel free to double click on any parts of this. And but essentially, so the idea is to have this base layer platform, which is one sidecar called Commit Boost, and it has the capability of instantiating multiple modules. And a single module here basically represents how the proposer interacts with a proposer commitment protocol. And just by example, if you think about mevboost today, mevboost itself is a protocol, but you also have mevboost, the sidecar, and the protocol mevboost basically sets down communication pipelines and rules of how the proposer interacts with the rest of the supply chain. And so the way to think about it, for example, is the proposer calls get header to a relay, and then this, based on the value of the header, decides to sign that header and send it back to the relay in order to get the payload. So this is like one part of the communication protocol to tap into mevboost today. And the idea is basically not to enable the status quo, which is the out of protocol PBS that we have today, but enhance that with additional modular protocols. So one thing that's very important here is that we have isolation and somewhat of control over what happens in terms of instantiating these different protocols, because it might just introduce additional risk just from an operational security perspective. So we basically leverage existing containerization to be able to limit resources on a per module basis, being it disk space or CPU usage or memory and things like that, and other kinds of configuration that just makes it, from a node operator's perspective, a lot more secure, and also have a lot more insight into what is going on, which is the second part. So Commit Boost also provides like a bunch of primitives, which makes it easy to develop these modules. And as part of that, for example, we provide like tools in order to generate metrics or monitoring and things like that, so that the node operator can have insights in real time or historically what actually happens on the box and how the different modules perform. So on one hand, having this base layer platform, being able to instantiate all these different modules in order to communicate with different proposer commitment protocols. But on top of that, having real-time insights into also what these proposer commitment protocols do, and as performance metrics just around resource usage. Then the final part really is the status quo today is signing off on a header, which we do through the CL. And we just tap into the existing Builder API to do this. But going forward, there'll be new types of commitments that we ideally do not want to, in the short term, require like a change in the CL every time there's a new proposer commitment protocol. So how do we get a proposer to basically make a commitment, which essentially is signing something, without introducing, on one hand, new key management or like infrastructure to issue these signatures? So the way we get around this, so on one hand, not having to do any changes in the CL, but also not introducing new infra, is basically by creating this standardized signer API, which the proposer commitment protocol teams can interface with when building these modules. So there's one standard API, but then we tap into existing infrastructure in order to get signatures. And so most professional node operators currently use key managers, these remote key managers like Web3 Signer or Dirk. But then a lot of solo stakers, or even some of the professional node operators, basically just use a more monolithic setup where the key is directly loaded into the VC, for example. So in order to cover all these cases, the signer API and the component behind it basically abstracts away all the complexity between either multiplexing to a remote signer or using a local key manager or a key store. And the modules basically have one standard interface in order to request a signature. And then depending on what the node operator setup is, they can decide, do I want to keep using my existing key management software because I'm an enterprise node operator and I have like these sharded keys and things like that? Or we are actually also looking into DVT and tapping into SSV or OVAL, for example. Or do you just have a local key store and you just want to sign things directly from your local key manager? So all that complexity is also abstracted away. And we basically now have one sort of unified standard interface to build these modules and issue commitments. Yeah, and I'll pause here.
Awesome, Kubi. And that's sort of all we had. I realized we didn't have a timeline slide in here. I didn't have time to update it, but where we're at in our journey is started earlier this year. We're now in audits for Commit Boost with Sigma Prime. They're the ones that created Lighthouse, so they were a great partner with us to work on this. And then that audit should be done at the end of the month, just in time for DevCon. Now, the audit is covering Commit Boost plus PBS, so basically backwards compatibility. So it becomes the same thing as running that boost today. And then as more and more of these modules get developed, we still have one more component we'll have to get audited, but we expect that to be done by end of November. And that has a lot to do with the API Kubi touched on at the end around signatures. What the end state I hope this looks like is I hope you guys can tell we're still early in our journey, but a solo validator will go into the tools they use today to select Commit Boost as the sidecar they want to run. And when they load that up, there'll be this sort of like app store that they'll see. And we're working with partners to do things like risk assessments on the security side, but also networking type stuff. And they'll see some apps they can run, maybe some additional APY tied to that, some description about the risk you run when you run it, and you select that module, you say that's a good one, and then maybe the inclusion list is the next one, and you can see there's a bunch of other solo stakers running it. It has a great rating, so you click that one, and it becomes this ideally point and click solution. It'll take years to get there, but that's how we kind of see this ending up for solo stakers and the tools they use today, working on those integrations. So I'll stop there, maybe stop sharing my screen, and we can work through questions.
Yeah, it's helpful to see that vision for like what it is kind of anticipated to be, and then what it is now. And I guess like as far as what it is now, is it something that you said it's going through audits? Like, is it something that people could actually go and load up in some fashion at this point?
Yeah, we would definitely encourage teams on the solo staker side to do testing. We have been with some of the folks on this call. I think Thorsten has even done some integrations within EthDocker to make this pretty easy. And I think Sam helped us with some testing. And we've been engaged since early on. One of the top priorities for us has been enablement of solar stakers. Now, we're not embedded in all the tools you guys use yet, but we're working towards that. And I guess the other thing we'll say is there are teams running it in prod today. They're sophisticated actors with prop money. It's obviously not audited, so I wouldn't encourage yet solo stakers to just ape into this. But once the audit is done, we get more metrics from mainnets. Once the audit's done, there's going to be a bunch more that come online, and we'll get quite a bit more metrics around all this. And I think ideally later this year, we'll be in a really good place. But the biggest thing is to understand from the solar staker community, when you're testing, are there any blockers for you running this? And if there are, what are they? And then we can start to work through this list, adding features, working with the teams that you all may use to run your validator, things like that would be very, very helpful for us. I think it's the biggest call to action that we might have, and we can share docs and everything like that afterwards. But yeah.
Cool.
I
Yeah,
mean,
I know it
speaking as a big DAppNet user, they have sort of that point and click interface, kind of like you described, for adding components, and they could potentially be a good partner for you in that regard. And could even make it easy by saying, we're going to swap out our current mevboost component, we'll put in your commit boost component, and then add mevboost back in as a plugin for that. So that could be an entree there.
Yeah, we definitely
I have a question, if you don't mind.
Ask away.
Yeah, I'm curious what the go-to-market strategy is and how you're planning to convince larger entities like Coinbase and so on to use commit boost, because they are usually quite slow in changing their infrastructure. And also why this wasn't integrated with something like mevboost, because the user experience of staking is getting harder, because there are so many different pieces that you need to think of. So I'm curious why it wasn't integrated into mevboost.
Yeah, and like I said, it's a nonprofit, so we don't like have a go-to-market strategy, I guess, if you will. But how we thought about it is backwards compatibility first, new things second. And if we were to just go to the validators and say, hey, this is just a copy and paste of mevboost, try it out, a lot of them would probably say no, because like mevboost is tried and tested. But so when we thought about, we'll call it the PBS module on commit boost, which is essentially mevboost backwards compatibility. But when we thought about the PBS module, we actually started to embed a lot of things that sophisticated actors do today, but have teams sustaining it. And this has a lot to do with OPSEC risk. And this looks like things like the Grafana and Prometheus seamless integration. Off the shelf, these guys will have like a team that has to manage all this. Off the shelf, you seamlessly get these plugins as a sophisticated actor. And there's also other risk management tools that we have embedded in the software. So there's different fallback mechanisms that they have. So reduced OPSEC risk. Maybe not a popular opinion, but we also have extensions on the PBS module. We call it timing games. This is one of those things, but really what it is it's just the same offering you get from ultrasound or Bloxroots today to play latency timing games. We're giving that power back to the proposer. So instead of them guessing through heuristics of what is my latency with these sophisticated guys, they do all these things. We just give it back to the proposer, and you get to kind of like adjust a lever that says, I'm only willing to wait until 8 seconds into the slot, and then I want all the headers and I'm selecting. Yeah, I'm kind of like butchering how this actually works in practice, but this is the mental model to think about it. It's sort of like you get to, if you want to wait until the very last millisecond, you can put that up to that last millisecond. You say, if I want to wait till 11.999, that's totally fine. And then you're kind of picking up a penny in front of a steamroller. And so some of these tools, sophisticated actors, what they have to do is they have to fork mevboost, they have to sustain that. Every hard fork, they have to work on it, or some guys may not even have it. And so this has been another sort of like a feature that people see advantageous around. And most of the people that like this or want it, they're actually doing it for risk management versus actually playing latency games in some way. They may have clusters in different parts of the world, for instance. And one of the other examples we thought about is like with DBT, there's some latency issues around missing a slot when these things happen. And so if like the cluster could specify, hey, we're only accepting a block up to this point, you have more time to collect the signatures and then get the block propagated across the network. So there's applications like that. But do want to note that extension comes off at default, and we don't promote timing games, but it's just a feature that people want. People are already doing it, and at least equitizes it across all validators. So it's things like that that have helped. And then you now got this sort of like jammed up PBS module going. As other modules come online, which they will later this year, instead of having to run new sidecars, you just download the app. And like I said, sophisticated solo stakers, core devs, no one really wants teams running multiple sidecars. So it's kind of like get used to running PBS today. It is better. You could potentially get more APY. You definitely have less OPSEC risk, more efficiency, plus you're ready for the future.
So maybe that's a
And
good segue into a question about like how permissionless is the creation of those modules, and maybe coupled with that, like how do validators actually, like what's the experience of using those? Like how do they decide which ones they want to
yeah,
make?
the latter part of this is a bit unknown still. There are no modules that are proliferated other than PBS. People are well aware of that. We actually just got off a call with a team earlier that works with a lot of validators around risk assessment from a quantitative, like operational perspective. They're looking at this, and then there have been audit firms that reached out to us. And the ideal state we end up with is kind of bringing these teams together so that as modules are launched, independent parties that maybe get paid to do this or do this as a public good, they risk assess these modules for teams. And so to be up to it's all up to the validator to opt into these things. If you download Commit Boost, you choose what you run. We aren't dictating you must run any of these things. And this kind of ties into your former part of the question, which is it is completely open. So anyone can design any protocol. As far as we know, there haven't been limitations. Maybe there's, I don't know if we got this. We are adding this feature, but maybe there's some complexities if you're not using Rust. So today, there's some limitations. Kibby can fill me if I'm wrong, but we have a solution to make it so you could code it really in any language, and there's a way to translate it into a module that, if you don't know Rust, you can still build things. But yeah, it's really open to anyone. But what I expect to happen in the market is we'll have PBS. Obviously, people will be running that inclusion list. There is a module called IL Boost that's been developed and being tested. And it's maybe not quite ready. We don't have the docs and everything for just to throw it out there, but it is a form of out of protocol inclusion list using some of the most robust designs from RIG at Ethereum Foundation. They helped us think through some of these things. And then there is, I would say, 5 to 6 teams building what's called preconfirmations. And folks on this call may have seen these, but they're all building modules on top of Commit Boost also. And so I expect later this year, we'll start to see those. Probably sophisticated guys will start first, and then some of the market will develop around how you risk assessments, best practices will be established. But right now I would say it's somewhat of an open slate, but we're aware that people need to be thinking about these risks and be able to give something back to the community to better assess it. So we're trying to coordinate around that.
Drew, following that question, say we're like a few years into the future, Commit Boost is what it has been adopted. People are permissionlessly creating these modules. How does a validator know? Like, as a node operator, I'm a person who sets up my node. I ignore it for 6 months. I log in once every 6 months when something is going wrong or I need to update or a fork is happening. How do I know which modules to use? Are there like blue chip ones? Are there ones that are recommended? Do I know that any of these sidecars aren't, or any of these like modules aren't going to create some sort of risk to my validator? Because I think that the other idea is that like validators don't want to have to like be constantly engaged and doing a lot of research. So like, what does that feature look like for you if in the future where Commit Boost is adopted and there are a ton of modules going?
Yeah, this is a two-edged sword. Yeah, it in my view, no matter what, the future is more complex. And that's the thesis I'm generally operating under. And I'm in the camp that actually that is better for Ethereum. And I don't mean complex from like an OPSEC bandwidth perspective, but more complex around the proposer may not be able to just set it and forget it any longer. And the reason for this, like you don't have to do that, but when you do that, you are turning autonomy back to those downstream from you, and kind of like what I discussed around the builder. And so, yeah, that is the reality of things down the road, at least in my view. But yeah, just
I'm gonna tee you up a little bit. Then can you follow up the rest of your answer? Feel free to finish that. Can you follow that up with what it looks like if Commit Boost doesn't exist?
Yeah, that's what I was about to lean into. Is there are efforts happening that are sidecars that will allow these commitments that require sophistication. And if you're concerned about just getting a few more blobs, just wait till you have a whole pre-conf market running on your box, wherever you may sit. And so what Commit Boost is trying to do is allow for any staker. Now, you're still going to delegate things. So you're still trusting to do someone for you, just like you do today in mevboost, but you're not doing the work. And you're giving them the condition and constraint of how they must operate, not just like a blank slate. And so, yeah, that's a lot of what Commit Boost does. And then the other side of this is, there are, not trying to bash on other teams, but there's other sidecars out there that still may allow for delegation, but they're venture backed, they're token based, they're governed, they're being developed by communities that are forcing certain RPCs for delegation. So they're making decisions for you. This platform, we're trying to keep agnostic. You run it, you choose what to opt into and what not to, and there's a way for you to delegate the sophistication required to run that module, just like you do in mevboost today. So in a future without Commit Boost, I guess we have a lot of sophisticated stakers, and it's highly accelerated in some way or another, or at least no way for home stakers to get access to these things. And you're making a decision out of the goodness of your heart not to do that for Ethereum.
I imagine in this future where there are like a ton of modules, like there are going to be people who are just recommending, like, especially that could be a place that EthStaker excels, is like, here are the modules that are recommended to run, that we know are safe, that are audited, that have like a network effect.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like an insurmountable problem.
Yeah, 100% right. And one of the other things I'll say about the future is, ideally, I hesitate to say this because we said this about mevboost, and we're still working on EPBS, but ideally, actually, what Commit Boost does is it gets into the CL itself. And we've already started talking with teams, either new CLs that are coming online or existing ones that are broadly adopted. And part of Commit Boost's idea is to have a good amount of grants come in, and we'll have teams focused on not only sustainment of the software, so there's someone 24/7, but during hard forks, we're there from the very beginning, getting things adjusted, set up, to help the Ethereum community go forward, but also the teams and grants we used ideally for research to actually create the specs of what client teams would have to change, and not putting the load on them to make the changes, think of the changes, but actually do that ourselves. And so, yeah, the ideal state is we don't actually need Commit Boost, but directly from your CL, you can make other commitments across these things. And, we go away, I go away, go hang out on the beach or something. But that's the ideal place we land in the future.
If I'm understanding that right, it's like the capabilities that you're describing within all of this would be built into each consensus layer client. Is that how you're describing this? Okay.
That's the ideal state, yeah. And I think the challenge with getting mevboost into the protocol to date actually has a lot to do not with the software. I think everyone knows how to make that change. It's the downstream APIs and those things that are the challenge. And like I said, Commit Boost, it's not the protocol downstream, it's just the software. And so it comes down to like specking, prioritization, community buy-in to get it into the CL, which is a longer process. This is why we need this now out of protocol, because the other teams are moving as well, that are building their sidecars. And so we needed this solution and to try to unite the community at least around one unified standard that everyone could build on.
Are there some killer apps that you have in mind, something that you wish somebody would build because if they did, it would drive adoption for you?
Pre-cons have high demand right now, but I have a list of like 30 things. I mean, this is why I started doing this, was I got interested. The question I asked myself is, what are other ways we can use Ethereum's validators in a way we don't use them today? And like, this is this type of stuff. So I think one of the most interesting things that could happen is blobs. There's a lot of debates around blobs. Some people think this is censorship. I tend to think Ethereum's built around its proposers. Like, we got to trust them. And we're not going to be able to do something that aligns with all of them. So give them the power to specify, I only want 2 blobs. I think that's like a really interesting low-hanging fruit. And another thing like Kubi and team have been working and thinking about also is just like pre-confirmation of blobs ahead of time. So is there a way, even for solo stakers, to know, hey, I'm about to have 8 blobs? They start getting that information ahead of time. And so then they're not trying to do this in this tight time frame, but they already have it. They know it's their time to stack a block. They pack the rest of the block just like they do today, but they've had that information and are able to propagate it throughout the network. So it's like things like that that may not be revenue driving, but at least help support the network in a way we can't today. I would love everyone to run the inclusion list module. It's just not ready, but that's another thing. But yeah, probably pre-comps and some of this like Ethereum aligned ethos are things that help solve today's issues, or what I want to see built, at least initially.
Okay, cool. I'm just looking through our list here to see if there's any questions we didn't quite get to. Like, is there a sense of the adoption it has gotten so far? Like, do you guys have that kind of visibility?
Yeah, I should have maybe touched on this. Yeah, so we have been running in Husky for, I think, 2 months, month and a half now. Probably 200 to 300,000 validators. Admittedly, we run about 50 to 100K of those. But we meet teams we didn't know they were testing, but there's probably a dozen to 20 teams that have been testing this already. Some of them home stakers as well, just to make sure like there's no issues. There have been a couple small things that we fixed prior to going into audits. And then I don't know how many validators are running in prod, but there's at least 2 teams I'm aware of that have started to switch like prop capital over. These are all professional node operators, and so no issues yet for them as well. And then we do have commitments from teams as soon as it's done with the audit to start switching more and more over. And it's a funny game of if they run it, I'll run it. And fortunately, our early partners are the ones that people see as reputable and ones they'd want to follow. And so we do expect, hopefully before year end, to have a good chunk of the network, 5%-ish going is kind of the target and where we think we can get to.
Cool. From like a practical perspective, I guess this was a question that kind of stuck in my mind is like, is there kind of a clear line between like the efficiency of your validator rewards, or like, a percentage change that it could result in by using any of these different modules? Like, it seems like it's very customizable, but I don't know if there's anything you're seeing like in the testing or just so far that could be interesting benchmarks to have like as an expectation for people who are considering it.
How much more money are you going to make me? Yeah, I wish I knew the answer to that. Yeah. No, so I'll touch on 2 points. Just with the PBS side, we have been benchmarking against mevboost. Probably doesn't impact you all, and it's in the grand scheme of life, it's small numbers, but it's 50 to 100% more efficient because it is rewritten. The sidecar is rewritten in Rust. You don't have to have Rust on your computer. You don't have to know Rust or anything like that. But there's quite a bit of efficiency gains just within PBS. But this is talking the orders of magnitude of like 25 to 50 milliseconds versus like send 7 to 15. Like, it's just such small numbers, it's just not going to make a huge difference. But we're doing more benchmarking. Now, with regards to additional rewards, there's a couple ETH research posts by teams who are building modules, but also building pre-comps. I can send those across, but probably the highest, they use the traditional finance volatility model. These guys are really, really good at derivatives trading, so that's their background. They're building these pre-comp networks and a module on commit boost, but they estimate rewards sort of on the bottom of somewhere between 1.5% more. So whatever staking reward is 3, you'll get 4 to 4.5 in the future with this turned on. Now, there's a lot of assumptions around that. We don't have a flourishing market. Obviously, financial models versus reality don't always end up in the same place, but people are trying to start to estimate this. And I think post-sequencing week, which is at Edge City before DevCon, there's about 50 teams coming together that are all really focused on this. And one of the key topics is like, how do you price a pre-conf? So it is different than a transaction. And so people are thinking about these different things, but getting the brightest researchers and minds together to help, at least align on some of this for the go forward. So we'll probably have more insights in the next month and a half.
Cool. Yeah, it's always kind of interesting to read those current research happenings, and it'd be cool to get those links, have us pointed towards that.
I want to just say one more thing too. We are well aware, like, people, we need to align incentives. We can't just ask people to do this out of the goodness of their heart. So even with the inclusion list module, similar to min bid, basically when you run it, your default is running inclusion list, which means you're picking up transactions that are getting filtered. But if it's your time to propose a block and you're a solo staker and you've waited a whole year, and you're running inclusion list, and that block just happens to have 100 ETH transaction that you can't fit because the inclusion list, we actually you can set a threshold that says if the mevboost built block is, more than 1% in rewards higher than the inclusion list built block, you just take the mevboost block. And so, we're trying to think of these interesting mechanisms where you still get some form of censorship across some period of time, but you're not, as a solo staker or whoever, having to give up that 100 ETH reward block that you were so fortunate to stack.
So block construction in general is a really big topic right now. Do you have a sense of like what sort of paths forward in block construction make standardized validator commitments more or less relevant? And like, does it seem like it will be definitely be the path forward? Are there types of block construction designs that might make validator commitments irrelevant?
Yeah, we get this question a lot with the whole discussions around sort of what Max and others were pushing. I don't want to poke fingers. And there are some dynamics between a proposer-centric future versus those outcomes. And this isn't specific to Commit Boost. This is more just holistically around like what proposers can actually have autonomy over. And so the way I view it is how much of a monopoly does the proposer have over its block? Any development in Ethereum that gets away from that does impact the effectiveness of Commit Boost. Personally, one of the key features of Ethereum is decentralization. And sometimes that gets conflated with censorship. And, I tend to sit in the camp of trust the million plus people until we have a bulletproof solution on the censorship side. And so still, obviously I'm doing this biased, but very much lean towards trust the million plus validators of Ethereum, give them some autonomy back, and let's see how things go.
I think just one very interesting development that has emerged from like precoms is that it has aligned a lot of actors like downstream or like across the supply chain overall to have an incentive to make changes to their existing pipes. And so just because of precoms, there's now like the first DevNet Helder, like in Zoo Berlin, and then after ECC Helder. So there's already like a version of the new sort of supply chain where the proposer can communicate constraints, which wasn't possible before. And this was just necessary in order to enable precoms. And now this is actually what we have tapped into to enable out-of-protocol inclusion lists, because now we can tap into the constraints API, which was initially created so that there is this like mechanisms of like communicating constraints on the block construction process. So some of these new things have just been good momentum in order to like evolve the pipes and get some of these new protocols or communication ways into place. And I think that's already happening now, and we'll probably go to mainnet soon. And then we are in a world where like proposers can already communicate constraints on the block construction process, which hasn't, and I think it wasn't actually that much of a technical lift, but there's always a lot of inertia, and you need to get a lot of people into a room and agree on things. And this has been one of the movements that helped that.
I see an interesting tension between kind of what you guys are building and what all the other people currently making sidecars are doing. They might want to try and lock you out, so theirs can be in there. But at the same time, have you reached out to them and said, we can make your job easier if you, instead of building yours as a standalone, build it on top of our platform, and we'll handle a lot of the integration for you? Are you getting any discussions or anything fruitful out of that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would definitely encourage the EthStaker community to assess all the teams building, and if you find Commit Boost is open for all stakers, to support that publicly. But I will say, from the development perspective, everyone is building a module on Commit Boost that's building these sidecars as well, excluding one research team, but they're doing research. It's not really a product, and it is definitely a sidecar built for very sophisticated actors. There are different levels of commitment from those teams. So their full go-to-market is on Commit Boost, and they're fully relying on us driving and getting adoption throughout the community. There are others who are also still going to push their own sidecar plus the module. So, and one of the other things I'll highlight is just these sidecars, these things are getting developed in communities such as LSTs that have day one lots of adoption. And so these things are already happening. I would just, the teams can get aware of these things, plugged in, start watching it. I think the time is coming for that now, and nothing against those teams and what they're doing. But again, it's, we're trying to create an open platform that everyone can build on and have access to, things like that, that you just don't get with these, or potentially run risk of not having with these other solutions.
Cool. So if there's anything like you would want us to have as a main takeaway, or like if you want to point people where to learn more, I know there's the GitHub page. I don't know if that's the where you would say go learn more, but yeah, just want to make sure we have kind of the key takeaway or where to go for any of us out there that want to go and read more about it.
In the GitHub page, actually, on the front part, I have a resource where I've listed like every talk, every presentation, every podcast, the documentation, all those things are linked. So I'll make sure you guys get that, so you don't have to try to read through some Rust code. Lord knows I can't do that either. That's one area. The biggest thing for us is just testing. And so if EthStaker did send out a tweet a couple weeks ago, but just some engagement around that. We just want to get feedback. Are there limitations? Are there tools that you guys use across your community that you're using to make your lives easier that we can start to integrate with? And we're not going to get them all, but getting some sense of like, hey, this is 80% of the EthStaker community uses this tool. We can start to prioritize it. We'll get to most of it eventually, but I think that's the sort of top thing. And if there's folks that want to contribute in other ways, we always need help with stuff like documentation. If there's teams that have ideas on how we could raise grants, all that, but I don't want to steal any ideas from the EthStaker community. They need to be funded as well. So, but the top priority would be testing for us.
Cool. Okay. Great. So if there's any other questions anybody had before we close out, looks like we're kind of getting towards the end, but anything else?
I would actually, if I could.
Yeah.
Sort of double clicking on leveling expectations a little bit. I would maybe, if we have a few minutes, talk about risks. Because we talked about the reward side, we talked a little bit about platform risks in terms of other sidecars, potentially gatekeeping, so all the benefits of building like an outer protocol solution like commit boost in the open, like with governance minimized. But maybe to double click again on the reward side, like for stakers in general, why, like, what is my incentive now to test and follow along? Okay, for one, I could either replace mevboost with commit boost, but then sort of being future proof, looking into additional commitments. Maybe we should talk a little bit about what are the risks of running such a module as well. So for precoms, for example, we talk about additional collateralization, because if you renege on preconfirmations as a proposer, there's additional slashing risk. So maybe we can elaborate a little bit on, hey, what do I actually as a staker should do now? What is the risk I take for additional rewards based on additional commitment types?
Yeah, in this market, it's not fully developed yet, but certainly within the module logic itself, they're likely all to have some form of slashing. And this is going to be enforced through platforms such as likely initially EigenLayer and Symbiotic, or whatever solutions are out there. There are teams thinking about this getting an EVM bytecode, so you don't have to rely on that. Commit Boost is agnostic to those things. It isn't part of the protocols, how they're developed. It's just the standardization of how those protocols interact with the proposer to make it as easy as possible for all. But yeah, there's certainly going to be slashing things tied to equivocation, tied to double signing, tied to I sold your pre-conf and then I didn't deliver it. There's going to be these additional things, and I'm hoping some of this gets abstracted away, or at least distilled into a number that really sophisticated teams that get paid to do this for a living can do that and then return it back to the community. That's where I'm hoping to get to. But those are risks. Just generally within Ethereum too, we are introducing new primitives of how a block was constructed. There's always risk tied to that. I'm not disagreeing with that at all. Certainly in a staged approach, I think it's much more beneficial for Ethereum long term to think about these things. But those are probably the top things. We built quite a bit into, I guess, increased complexity of the tooling. That's probably another risk for solo stakers, even just within Commit Boost. You don't have to run all these tools, but there's definitely more features and options for you. I'm guessing as people launch things, it will come with certain things defaulted on, with stuff like that to help everyone. We just haven't worked through all that, but that's probably another sort of vector of potential risk that people have. For professional stakers, we're just giving them the same tools they have internally in most cases, or like additional things. We're a little less from their perspective about how to navigate these extra safety mechanisms, things like that. But people who aren't familiar with that, certainly that's another sort of vector.
Cool. Good question. Okay.
And maybe,
yeah. Go
I don't
ahead.
know, Ladislaus, if you had any that you wanted to add. I know you've talked with us quite a bit about this, but something I didn't hit on.
No, 100%. I guess just to add some color from I know the EthStaker community. We have got also a lot of purists. Like most of the people who don't run mevboost are like solo stakers, home stakers. So I think it's also important to note that this is all out of protocol, right? So it's a lot of the sort of the things we've talked about are sort of stemming from this idea that we realized we can use like this massive out of protocol infrastructure which we've built over the years since the merge. So the relays, the build infrastructure, this structures, etc., which is super performant, like low latency, etc. We can use this for more than just give me the payload or I build a local block. And so this has to do with rollup fragmentation. So a lot of like different problems Ethereum has, but we realized we can solve for these problems leveraging existing infra. Yeah, so I think it's just worthwhile to understand that it's all out of protocol what we're doing here, which has certain risks to it, and sort of what we could hope for is that it buys us a little bit of time for other research directions, which might change the staking landscape in the future, such as separating attesting from proposed duties inside the protocol. So yeah, just a few like overarching comments, I guess, to add here, like how commit boost as a tool and proposer commitments in general fit into the overall staking landscape.
Yeah, definitely out of protocol. There are definitely downsides to that. There are upsides, and I think people at the Ethereum on the research side are quite excited to see some of their ideas put into practice without having to make in protocol changes. And then you can get a good sense of like, how does the market actually develop? And then you take those learnings and you put it in protocol. I think inclusion lists are going to be our first implementation of that. Like ideally we get a good chunk of the network running that. And then when we get to whenever inclusion lists get in protocol, we have a good sense like, hey, this model worked, this model didn't. These are the things that happened in the market dynamics that played out, which are all theoretical today, but could be in practice with something like Commit Boost.
Exactly. And while we're sort of tinkering out of protocol, we need to make sure that we not, for example, unnecessarily unlevel the playing field among stakers, such as more sophisticated and less sophisticated actors. So this is sort of ties into the whole story you have told why when we talked about platform risks and how to mitigate platform risks around Commit Boost and where Commit Boost thrives in this sense.
Yeah, I think interesting to build on that. I think a lot of home and solo stakers, they look to trusted experts to tell them what tools should I use and how can I do this? How can I make my life easy? Because I don't really understand what's going on under the hood necessarily. And so you can take a tool like this. We've had sophisticated partners who've made these things that bundle up complicated resources, drop them into this platform, and that will solve this problem for you. So I think there's a lot of room to run with the idea of how can you make this thing really clear and easy, set guideposts for solo stakers to follow.
Agreed.
Cool. Well, this has been really interesting. Thank you guys for the time and discussion here. Really appreciate it. And I think at this point we can probably wrap up, and only a couple things to mention here at the end. One is that you should get the POAP. So Remy, if you have the slide about that,
Yep,
we can
it's on.
show the process. I'm imagining it's exactly the same as some of the more recent community calls. So unless there's a curveball and something's different.
It's very similar. I can just go through it if you want to. So
Yeah,
if you want to get
yeah.
this community call POAP, all you have to do is send a 0.001 ETH to poap.ethstaker.eth. All the info's on stream right now. You can send it either on mainnet, Arbitrum, Base, or Optimism, and you have to do it before October 27 at midnight. That's pretty much it.
Cool. Great. And then the last couple things is two things. One, the next community call is going to actually be this weekend. I guess it's either the 27th or the 28th, depending on your time zone. And it's going to be for the 47th community call for the Rocket Pool Saturn Zero upgrade. And it'll be live streamed, when that's actually happening. So come join that one. It's on the EthStaker events calendar if you want those details. And then the other thing I would mention is that EthStaker is going to be at DevCon. You may have seen tweets we've put out about this over the last couple of weeks. So come and join us there for the community hub, which is the home operator hub we'll have a number of different mini workshops and opportunities to troubleshoot nodes. And, it's for existing or new people interested in staking independently. And then the other thing, there's a impact space, I think we're calling it, right? Where it's the EthStaker crew will be there. So a couple different places where you can meet up and say hi to your EthStaker and broader community friends. All right. Well, I think that's it. Thanks for joining, and thanks again to Drew and Kubi for this discussion. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
For having us.
Thanks, everyone.